Next subunit is 2.6, due professional care and continuing professional development. We have read about it, a little bit of it in the previous slides. We did read due care. What does it mean exactly? We read that internal auditors must use skill and wisdom, prudence expected of a reasonable auditor. Means we cannot be extraordinary in performing our duties. We cannot be infallible. But whatever we are doing, it must be expected from a reasonable, prudent internal auditor. That's the idea behind it. So when we say due care, it doesn't mean 100% outstanding, extraordinary performance. So when you say exercising due professional care, internal auditing, what we mean that internal auditor at least should be alert and be careful that there is a possibility of fraud. What is fraud? Fraud is intentional wrongdoing, intentional concealing of facts, intentional omission. The difference between fraud and error is fraud is intentional, iradatan. You do it deliberately, whereas errors and omissions are just mistake that can happen anytime. So internal auditor must be alert of possibility of fraud. What is fraud? Intentional wrongdoing, where a person deliberately does something wrong, conceals, cheats, deceives. Errors and omissions are just honest mistakes, where an individual just overlooks or misses something. Errors mean a mistake, omissions mean you omitted or excluded something that should have been included. Inefficiency mean using resources in a way that results in wastes. More of the resources are wasted. So internal auditor must be familiar with what inefficiencies can creep into production, wastes. Ineffectiveness means, there's a difference between efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency means using minimum resources to produce output, and effectiveness means that that output that has been produced meets the required objective. Like for example, a company manufactures ceramic plates. Being efficient means that company uses minimum raw material to produce 100 plates, ceramic plates. That is efficiency, taking minimum material and producing 100 plates. But being effective means that those 100 plates that have been produced meet the desired specification of our finished good. It means efficiency means use of resources, and effectiveness means how well those resources have been used. So inefficiency means wasteful resources, and ineffectiveness means that those resources have not been used in the right way. Internal auditors must also be aware of any possible conflict of interest. Conflict of interest we have already studied much more in detail, and he must also be alert to any activities or conditions that can indicate some irregularity or that may encourage something to go wrong, like any weaknesses in the systems, any red flags, any indication that something can go wrong. So the internal auditor must be careful. When we say due care, it doesn't mean perfect or infallible performance or extraordinary performance, but at least be alert to wrongdoings, frauds, omissions, inefficiency and waste. Internal auditors has to keep his eyes open. He cannot just believe in what he's told. He has to be alert himself in order to be effective in his performance. So let us discuss what the due care actually mean in practice. As I've already told you, due care doesn't mean extraordinary performance. Due care means reasonable care and competence that is expected from a prudent and reasonable auditor. So it's a reasonable care and competence, not absolute care and absolute competence. So remember, due care does not mean infallibility or extraordinary performance. We are not angels. Only the angels can be infallible. Angels can perform extraordinary work. Since we are human beings, to err is human. We make mistakes. So we can only give the reasonable care, the reasonable competency. Extraordinary performance is not what is expected from internal auditors. So what this due professional care implies, how does it apply to our work? Due care for internal auditor means that internal auditor, for his job when he's working as an internal auditor, conducts his work or his examination to a reasonable detail. It just doesn't mean that there are 1000 transactions and he just look at one or two and assumes all of the others are same, unless and until the samplings, statistical sampling have been employed to assess the level of risk. So due professional care means that auditor conducts his verifications to a reasonable extent. And reasonable extent, to what extent, 10%, 20%, 30% of the work, depends upon his judgment. Depends upon the risk factor involved. This depends upon the strength of internal control. So since his work is based upon sampling, testing, so that is why internal auditors cannot give absolute assurance. They can only give, mind the word, they can only give reasonable assurance, but not absolute assurance. He cannot give absolute assurance that all is okay. Non-compliance, irregularities do exist. So internal auditor cannot give absolute assurance that non-compliance and irregularities do not exist. So that must be kept in mind, that internal auditors cannot give absolute assurance. They cannot be expected to perform extraordinary or infallible work, because the work of the auditor is test based, sampling based. We will study about sampling and tests, etc. in later stages. So that is why we cannot give absolute assurance. However, nevertheless, means the possibility of material irregularities or non-compliance needs to be considered. Means we cannot expect extraordinary performance, but still the internal auditor must consider that there could be material misstatement, there could be material non-compliances. So that's what he should keep in his mind. But at the same time, we should not expect that he will perform some extraordinary or infallible work. Then there is a standard. I am again telling you, do not need to memorize any standard. And again I'm telling you that your effort should be directed 90% towards the MCQs and the explanation given in each option, and your 10% time must be spent upon reading the theory. Theory plays very, very limited role in passing the exam. Giving an example, one of my students wrote CMA Part 1 exam 2 days ago in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh. This person read each and every word of the textbook many times, understood the concepts very well, and spent almost 80 to 90% time on the book alone. He showed me that he had all the markings and all the jottings and highlighting and everything. The result, he failed miserably. He couldn't reach the essay type. Because reading theory is very easy, but doing the question is a real challenge. So that's why I'm again and again telling you people that you must spend most of your time on doing questions if you want to pass. And I give you my personal example. I qualified CIA way back in 2005, October 2005. It was Ramadan during that time, and I remember that I did not even know that any book exists for CIA. What did I do? I did about 2500 to 3000 MCQs, so much in detail, extraordinary fine in detail. I knew why the wrong is wrong, why the correct is correct. I spent most of my time doing the questions, understanding the concept through questions, building the ideas of the topics from the questions. I learned everything about CIA from the questions, and the result was simple. I passed all the 4 parts in a single go. During that time there were 4 CIA parts, now there are 3 CIA parts. So I'm telling you all this from my experience. Please spend more time on questions, understanding the options, the real life questions, and try to limit your reading just 10%. I don't say totally Ignore reading. Yes, that is important. That gives you idea what it's all about. But spend 10% of your time on reading and spend 90% time on your MCQs, doing questions. It's all about questions. So I didn't even remember any standard number I did then. And even you people, when you will write paper, there is no mentioning of any standard number, nor are you expected to memorize the numbers. All you need to remember or keep in mind what the standards tell you, how to conduct our work. All right. So internal auditors must exercise due professional care. And how do they exercise due professional care? To what extent they should do the work depends upon some elements. So please discuss these with me one by one. First, to what extent should I check my work depends upon the engagement objectives. Objectives require that I conduct an extensive testing. I may go up to 80 to 90% of the data. So it all depends upon the objectives of the engagement. To what extent should I test the data given to me for audit? Next, complexity. If the transactions are complex, the data, it means there is more chances of going things wrong. It means complex data and complex transactions require extensive testing. Materiality. If materiality, we'll study about that later in the later lectures. If the materiality level has been set low, lower the materiality level, the more transactions I will test. The extent of work would be wider. Or the significance of matters to which assurance procedures are applied. If the matter is significant, the extent of the work would be much more. If the relative complexity is high, the testing would be more. If materiality has been kept at low level, materiality means that anything above $100 is material. What it means then I will conduct more testing, I will expand my testing. If materiality level has been set to $5,000, anything above $5,000 is important, rest is not. Then of course there will be less testing. So if materiality level is low, there will be more testing, more extended work. If the matter under review is significant, crucial, inventory, high valued inventory, very valuable, then the extent of work would be higher. So all these matter determine to what extent would I conduct my work. Adequacy and effectiveness of governance. If governance is adequate and effective, extent of work would be reduced. If risk management is robust, stronger system, extent of work could be reduced. If the control processes are working well, internal control system is operating well, in that case, less testing might be required. But on the other side, talking it in reverse, governance is not effective. There are looters sitting in the board of directors. That requires more testing. Risk management is weaker. Technically, there is no risk management department. You need more testing. Extent of work goes up. And the internal control processes are weak. You need to conduct more work, unfortunately. And if there is a probability that significant errors are present, higher the probability of gadbad problems, the extent of work would go up. Higher the probability of fraud, there is more possibility that fraud is has been committed. You extend your work. If there is more probability of non-compliance, you will expand your work. If the probability of errors is low, reduce your work, extent of work. Probability of fraud and non-compliance is low, again the extent of work could be curtailed or could be reduced. And every activity or process you undertake, any engagement, you should remember that cost of assurance should be kept in mind. But because if you started conducting extended work, it is involving more cost, but the expected benefits are lower, then eventually it will put the business in a bad situation. So cost of assurance in relation to potential benefit must always be kept in mind so that the work conducted has less cost and more potential benefits. Continuing with your implementation standard 120, since there is an extensive use of technology computer based information systems where the data is compiled and processed through computer rather than physical books. So in such situation, the exercise due professional care internal auditors must consider the use of technology audit. I told you we use the computer assisted audit techniques, ECL. There is audit software which we call GL systems, data extractors. We can use Excel sheets to extract the data from client system. Many off-the-shelf available softwares that we can use. So use of technology-based audit and other data analysis technique, that is also a part of the internal auditor's job, that internal auditors must be familiar with the techniques that we use. If you remember, it is in knowledge based. The proficiency is in standards, techniques and procedures, knowledge for the fraud and the internal controls and the IT, and the use of internal audit, the use of the audit techniques in a computer based environment. So in order to exercise due professional care, the internal auditor must be able to use technology based audit and other data analysis technique, because we talking about big corporations where millions of transactions are conducted each year. So the internal auditor has to read each and every transaction. That is not possible in the limited time available, and moreover it will be costly. So the computer techniques in auditing could be used to analyze the data, rank them in ascending and descending order, rank them according to the significance, rank them according to the dates, in which dates the transactions were recorded, so as to identify especially the transactions before the year end and immediately after the year end are very crucial. That's where the most of the frauds are committed and perpetrated. So that's why if the data could be brought down in computers and analyzed this way, it could help you a lot in identifying the trends in data and identifying any anomaly or any wrongdoing. Continuing with the standard 1220 implementation standard in due care. Internal auditors again are not angels. They can make mistakes, they can make mistake of judgments, but at the same time they must be alert to significant risks that might affect the business, that might affect the business objectives. Those risks might affect operations, like means inventories being stolen. Because the controls are weak, there are no cameras and guards, effective system of monitoring of inventory. So there is a risk that the inventory might be stolen, resources might be stolen. So internal auditor must be alert that significant risk that might affect objectives, operations, resources could exist. But again, we cannot provide 100% assurance or absolute assurance. What we can give is reasonable assurance. And even if we perform our work with due professional care, we are not giving any guarantee that any significant risk will be identified. So remember, assurance procedures alone when performed with due professional care do not guarantee that all significant risks will be identified, because audit is test based, so we cannot provide assurance, 100% assurance that the significant issues or significant risk will be identified. So what we are doing is due care, reasonable care expected from auditors. What you can use is, as I told you, that at the year end, the auditors prepare an analytical for the last 4 or 5 years that compares the margins, the net profit margins, the ratios of current assets to total assets, or current assets to total liabilities, or current assets to current liabilities, various ratios. If the business is performing in a predictable, stable situation, then the relationships and analytical procedures should show a consistent result, like the GP is 20% for the last 4 or 5 years. Okay, then what happened suddenly? GP has jumped to 80%. We should have a justification. Why GP jumped to 80%, GP percentage? So this unexpected analytical results must be investigated. What happened then? How could the GP jumped from a merely 20%, let me take the pointer, to a whopping 80%? What happened? you should have some valid explanation for this. So this unexpected jump from 20 to 80 must be investigated and fully explained. What happened? Did we increase the sale price, or was the cost of production lowered? There has to be some justification. All right, we perform our work with due care, but how can we demonstrate that we have used the due professional care in the conduct of our work? Now let us consider. My name is Asif, and I have conducted audit, and I was working as an internal auditor of company X. This is my report, and these are the given facts. There is another auditor, Ajmal, for example. Based on the given facts, he reached the same conclusion that I have. It means I have applied due professional care. Or what I have done, or what I reported or recommended, another auditor would have recommended the same recommendation or conclusion in the similar circumstances. It means I have been employing the due professional care in the conduct of my work. So this is how we can demonstrate how the due professional care has been applied. Due professional care can be demonstrated if the auditor applied the care and skill of a reasonably competent and prudent internal auditor in the same or similar circumstances. Now, I have done the work in a similar way that any other internal auditor has done. It means the reasonable care has been employed in the conduct of work. Alright, so that ends the due care in practice. The next area is the continuing professional development. Repeatedly I am telling you that every accountancy qualification, CIA, CA, CP, etc., they have CPD or CPE. Sometimes it is called CPE. It means continuing professional development. Once you become a doctor or an engineer or an professional accountant, your professional body requires you that you keep updating your knowledge and skills. Never stop learning. So as a CIA, as an ACCA, as a CMA, I am also required to fulfill certain CPs. As an ACMA, I am also required to submit certain CPs to my parent organizations, evidencing that I have, during the last year, I have updated my skills and knowledge. I've conducted certain orientation sessions, certain courses. So that is crucial. So continuing professional development, which encourages internal auditors to continue their education to enhance their proficiency, because they have to keep their knowledge updated. That's how they will become more effective in the conduct of their work. So more on continuing professional development. Internal auditors are encouraged, in fact they are, under the code of ethics, they are also required to keep their knowledge updated under the principal competence. So the internal auditors must stay informed about improvements and developments in the internal audit standard. That specifically is the area that applies to the proficiency level of internal audit. Remember, procedure, techniques and standards, that's the area where we have to be proficient, the most important. Standards, procedures, techniques, this is the first. Second, we can pursue any professional education like ACCA, CMA. These are all professional education. They are different from the normal academic qualifications. And the most recommended, in order to work as an internal auditor, you do not need to be a CIA. But if you obtain professional certification like CIA or other designations related to internal auditing, it means you have updated your knowledge and skills and you are more relevant for the job. You have improved and developed your skill. So it's if I do not meet these requirements, if I do not earn the CPD points every year, that as a qualified CMA, I have to earn 30 CPs every year, 30 CP credits. If I do not, they will remove my name from the members and they will revoke my CMA certificate. So continuing professional education is the responsibility of each internal auditor, whether qualified or not. If you're qualified, then it's compulsory for you. And since Chief Audit Executive is the one who is heading the internal audit department, so he is uniquely able to encourage internal audit staff in this regard, that he should, every year we have read in the previous lecture, the internal audit department head at least every year must assess the adequacy of the skills, competence of his staff members, and whenever then he finds any gap in the knowledge that is required to conduct the work, then he must arrange for some training courses and etc. So that ends your 2.6 due professional care and continuing professional development. Will continue with the later lectures shortly.